By this point, it's somewhat of a cliche to point out that many ostensibly pro-life conservatives really are just pro-life in utero, but do not adopt pro-life policies ex utero in terms of protecting vulnerable people, the least of these, having a comprehensive, holistic philosophy of life. And I think that is a fair critique. And even though it seems to be cliched to point it out, I think it's important to keep pointing it out as long as the gross moral hypocrisy that is so central in the pro-life movement and the conservative movement in North America remains. So even though it seems like maybe it's been a point that's been repeated too often, I want to repeat it in this video with a very incisive example. And the example is a congressman in the United States named Randy Fine, who is the U.S. representative for Florida's 6th congressional district, which he has held that position since April of 2025. Randy Fine is a Republican and has taken a very strong, quote unquote, pro life, anti abortion stance. He has, for example, supported legislation which would ban abortion after 15 weeks. He voted in support of legislation which would ban abortion even after 6 weeks. He has also supported legislation that would prohibit abortion based on genetically inherited disabilities. And he called an attempt to enshrine abortion rights in the Florida state constitution, quote unquote, disgusting. So Randy Fine on that point is very strongly pro life. However, there are also um, aspects of Randy Fine which are much less pro life. And that comes when he talks about Gaza. So we're going to play a clip from just the last week when he was interviewed on CNN with respect to his views on Gaza. It's about a 1 minute clip. I think it's quite extraordinary. I'm going to play a bit of it, offer some commentary, play the rest, and then debrief the rest of it.
I know you were well aware of Iran's influence on groups, terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. In an interview, though, last month, you said this when asked about how to treat Gaza.
In World War II, we did not negotiate a surrender with the Nazis. We did not negotiate a surrender with the Japanese. We nuked the Japanese twice in order to get unconditional surrender. That needs to be the same here. There is something deeply, deeply wrong with this culture, and it needs to be defeated.
Okay, a couple of things to note here from that statement originally on Fox News. So he approves of the process of nuking Japanese civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. He doesn't critique that. So he thinks that was morally justified, which means it entails, in principle, it is morally justified to nuke civilian populations, even though targeting civilians is considered a war crime. But he approves of that. And I would just commend anybody who thinks like this, who thinks it is morally justified to nuke civilian populations, to read journalist John Hershey's 1946 book Hiroshima, where he talks about what he saw and eyewitness accounts from Hiroshima after it was nuked, and then tell me that you think that that is morally justified to vaporize tens of thousands of people and level an entire city and give people cancer for decades afterwards. So that's my initial response. The second point that I want to note here is he doesn't talk about defeating Hamas. He talks about defeating Palestinian culture with the framework of nuking a culture, of nuking a territory. To talk about destroying culture, a culture, the Palestinian culture, by definition, that is genocidal. That's what genocide is. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But let's just finish the excerpt.
Did you really mean to say that the U.S. should use nuclear weapons against a people because there's something wrong with their culture?
Of course not. What I was saying.
He says, of course not, except that's freaking exactly what he just said, which is so infuriating. However, his words again are about to indict him. Just watch what he now says.
is that we didn't negotiate with evil in World War II. We defeated the Germans. We defeated the Japanese using any means that were necessary. And the same needs to be done in Gaza. Nuking Gaza would be a terrible idea. The fallout would drift into Israel. It would kill the hostages. The point that I was making.
Okay, that's all that we need, I think, from hearing from Randy Fine. He just said there he doesn't think that we should nuke Gaza. And then he explains why. He doesn't say because it's immoral to drop nuclear bombs on civilian populations. Incredibly, he says because that would potentially kill the Israeli hostages in Gaza, and because the fallout from the bombs would potentially drift into Israel and hurt Israeli citizens and residents. What he doesn't say is that there's any problem in principle with nuking Gaza and wiping out all the civilians of Gaza, except insofar as it harms Israelis. Now, there's something in the background here that it's worth pointing out is Randy Fine has a very binary worldview between good and evil. And in his binary worldview, the United States and Israel are good, and Palestinians and World War II Japanese and Germans are evil. And when they are categorically evil, entirely evil as a people, then anything is warranted to destroy evil from good. And because you're completely good, anything you do then will be justified. And that is a profoundly dangerous binary worldview. Rather than to recognize, for example, in, I think, correct Judeo Christian theology, that the line between good and evil runs down the center of every human being's heart. We're all a mix of good and evil, of wheat and tares, and we always need to question ourselves and our own impulses and our own rationale for acting. And the second that you can no longer do that, you can no longer critique yourself, you are now at far greater liability to commit evil yourself. Uh, so for Randy Fine, pardon the very bad pun, but he's fine with nuking a civilian population, the population of Gaza, just if if you could prevent any Israeli hostages from being harmed or any fallout from hitting Israel, it seems like by implication he is okay in principle with nuking Gaza in the same way that the United States in World War II nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And okay, you're fine to hold that position, I guess, but don't tell me that you're pro-life when you hold that position, that you're okay with nuking people in Gaza, including people who may be pregnant, because he apparently cares about fetuses in utero, but he doesn't care about infants, small children, men, women, the elderly. He's okay with nuking them en masse. Just don't harm any fetuses in utero, I guess. Now, you could say, well, that's just Randy Fine. That's just one guy. Except there is zero outrage within the Republican Party or the pro-life movement against this guy who has a history of making morally monstrous comments like this. There is no outrage against him. If Randy Fine started advocating for abortion access, Republicans and the pro-life movement would decimate him. But when he repeatedly talks about pro-genocide rhetoric against people in Gaza, the Palestinians, there is utter silence. So this is not just a moral indictment of this moral hypocrite. This is a moral indictment of the Republican Party and of people who came to claim to be pro-life about the fetus in utero, but who are silent when Republican politicians advocate for pro genocide rhetoric against vulnerable peoples like Palestinians.